Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our event today. We're really delighted so many of you could join us. I'm Fiona Howie, I'm the Chief Executive of the Town and Country Planning Association, and I'll be chairing this opening session today. As well as thanking you for coming, I must thank Sport England, who support a strand of our work as part of their active environments funding. So they've made this event possible today, and we're really grateful for that. I know many of you will be aware of the TCPA, but I'm also conscious not everybody will have been to some of our events before or come across our work. So I just wanted to highlight that we're a charity committed to making sure that people live in homes, places and communities that enable everyone to thrive. And our priorities very much draw on our heritage. So the TCPA was founded actually 125 years ago last week. So that's why their little anniversary pin badges, hopefully people have got. And we were founded by the originators of the Garden City movement. And their desire to enable the practical achievement of well-designed, healthy and sustainable places for everyone continues to drive the work that we do today. And our work is divided up as shown, although, of course, everything is incredibly intertwined. We know that healthy placemaking and climate are intertwined. We know that healthy placemaking and community participation are very much entwined, and hopefully that will be very much reflected in the conversations and our presentations today. But what does underpin or overarch all of our areas of work is that, of course, we know that where people live has profound impacts on their health, well-being and life chances. And this is especially true of children and young people who are rapidly developing physically, emotionally and socially. So not quite 125 years ago, but part of our more recent history is that a guy called Colin Ward worked for us as our education officer from 1971. Now, I appreciate not everyone or maybe anyone will have come across the work of Colin, but during his time working for the TCPA, he published widely on education, architecture and town planning. And most notably, he published The Child in the City in 1978. So part of his legacy and his work, we'll be publishing a collection of articles in our journal. People might have seen recent copies outside, but the next edition will showcase some of that, including an article from my colleague Gemma Hyde, who will be chairing one of our sessions later. But in her article, Gemma writes, writing in the late 70s, Ward's work covers so many contemporary issues around children, young people and where they live, including the differing needs and rights of girls and young people in public space, the exclusion of children and young people from decision-making about the places in which they live, the impacts of poverty and deprivation on life outcomes, and the continued failure of planners and designers to consider children at all in the planning and designing of places. Now, I don't want to dwell too much on the depressing reality that we haven't managed to resolve those issues in the intervening almost 50 years. But what I do want to note is to say that how pleased we are that we're able to draw on Colin's legacy, but now also undertake work again related to children and young people. The aim of our conference today is to explore the relationship between children, young people and the built environment, the challenges of and opportunities for creating healthy places in which they can thrive, and to showcase some of the important work already happening in this space. We very much hope the event will be informative, hopefully even enjoyable, but we also hope that it will spark conversations and thoughts that can inform our work on the topic for the next couple of years. So thank you again for joining us. And without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our keynote speaker, Anne Longfield, CBE. Anne's Executive Chair of the Centre on Young Lives. She spent the last 3 decades working to improve the life chances of children, particularly the most vulnerable. She was Children's Commissioner for England from 2015 to 2021 and led a national children's charity. She's a passionate champion for children, influencing and shaping the national debate and policy agenda for children and their families. So welcome, Anne, and over to you.
I'm really pleased to be here today and to join you for this conversation, which I think is one of the most important conversations we can have as parents, as with children as well, but as members of the community and indeed wider society, you know, what could be more important than how we can create environments where children and families and communities can really thrive. So really pleased that you've organised this conference today and chosen this topic. I'm really pleased to be able to share some thoughts with you as well at the start of the day. And when I became a parent for the first time, I was living in London, and this is kind of late 90s. And I was lucky enough to live in one of those places, not necessarily the most kind of fanciest places, but it was one of those places where new parents kind of wanted to be. They flocked to these areas, so-called at the time Nappy Valley areas. There were places where, you know, there were parks, there were parents who also had young kids, places you could probably have some coffee, green spaces, you know, relatively affordable, but also where there was plenty of support for children, and these little enclaves were places where people would flock. And at the time, I really just thought, well, you know, so many parents, especially those living in social housing or especially those on lower income, don't have any of those choices about where they live or actually the kind of support in their area or indeed the amenities in their area. And what we know is that too often in some of the most disadvantaged areas, there's also some of the greatest paucity of support and indeed kind of environmental support for those families. So my starting point is, you know, it's actually, we've got choices about the communities as a society that we want, and children haven't been high enough on that list, in my view, of priorities when it comes to either designing local areas or making decisions about what happens in neighbourhoods. And I think we're seeing some of the results of that, and I also think there's now a growing consensus that this needs to change. So I'm going to attempt not to have too many depressing statistics, and I am an optimist before we start, but there are some which I just think we do need to acknowledge. And so the starting points, here we are. So in broad terms, isn't just about the where you live or the context of where you grow up, but it is about children's lived experience of childhood. And childhood is one of those things that, you know, we've all experienced. We know how important it is. It's important at the time, but you know, it really shapes us in the way we are as adults. So what happens during childhood impacts the rest of our lives, and it's important for children as individuals and for families, but it's also important for us as a wider society. It's what shapes our wider society, both in terms of social development, but also in economic development too. And so the starting point, if you like, for a bit of, you know, where are we now, is that actually most children in our country are doing reasonably well. That's not to say we couldn't do much better. It's not to say that, you know, children couldn't have better experiences, but in broad terms, most children are doing okay. However, there's a sizable group of children, and this really constitutes probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of children, for whom this just isn't the case. They don't share in the benefits that other children do, and that will impact not only their experience as they grow up, but also different aspects of their lives as well. And too often, it's that entrenched disadvantage and generational disadvantage that will have an impact not only on their lives, but on their future opportunities and, of course, our prosperity, as I say, as a nation. And many of these are complex problems, and I've got some of those depressing statistics coming up. But too often, they'll start in childhood, they'll continue into adult life, and then often they'll cascade throughout generations without that link being broken. And what we haven't done enough about as a country is to make sure that that disadvantage cycle is broken, and it hasn't been. And the social and economic cost to us as a country and those children and families as individuals is huge. Many of the discussions you'll be hearing throughout the general election is about things we can't afford. Well, actually, we're spending billions on crisis for children and families at the moment. And that doesn't have to be the case. So this is all about understanding how we help children thrive and how we help them stay well. And here's some of those stats for you. And I've just drawn a few out here because, you know, it's important that we know what level of disadvantage so many children are living with. A third of all children growing up in poverty. That's something that is said quite often. There's been discussions this week about the impact of child poverty, but it somehow becomes the norm. A third of all children, a quarter of children actually, are in absolute poverty, and a significant section of those in what the Joseph Routy Foundation called destitution. This is today in this country. And most of those will have parents at work. 2/3 of them are living in households where parents are working. So that we haven't got time to go through the impact of that, but that is significant. 1 in 6 children, about 2 million children, are living in what I've called vulnerable households, living in households where a parent may have addictions, severe mental health conditions, or this domestic violence in the home. Again, things that make the home a difficult place to be for children. If you think during the pandemic, when children were at home for extensive periods of time, then these were the children who were particularly at risk. The 1 in 6 children, now nearly 1 in 5, with a probable mental health condition. This isn't just, a little bit of anxiety. It's actually an assessment of a probable mental health condition. So whilst these are huge numbers, I suspect they also could be more. And some of the further details about what that disadvantage means. 40% of children now live with unhealthy weight. More than 25% are obese. 47% of teenagers saying they've been a victim or witness of violence in the last 12 months. Nearly half of children saying that. And when you look at the impact of some of this on children's everyday life, there's an attendance crisis in school, which means that about 1/5 of children are persistently absent. That's 1 day out of 10. We know more children are coming off school rolls and being educated at home. These are all children who are becoming marginalised from the mainstream of school and their communities. And the question always comes, how has this come about? Well, again, we could fill this conference for days on end to talk about that. But certainly over the last decade and decade to 12, 14 years, there's been increasing levels of need with children at a time when that support to be able to reduce those risks has been declining. And there's a whole range of people working out quite the causality of some of that. But it's undoubtedly so that the amount of investment in the help up front, the sure starts, the places to play, the support for families, the schools staying open after school, the things going on in parks, the youth clubs, the youth services, they have declined drastically over the last decade plus. And at the same time, local authorities, as many of you will know, have also had reduced budget. And we see the consequences in many of those things, I think, that I've just talked about. But the place it is very visible and remains is a service that is universal, where most children do go, which is school. And so what we find is that schools are the ones who are now trying to cope with the children who come to school hungry, the children who haven't got access to support at home, the children who are experiencing, very negative environment at home. And the round sum of that is that without help and without turning this around, and I did say I was an optimist, then those children will have diminished life chances. And again, that's not something that any of us would want to see. And the point here is not to depress everyone, but it is where we are. But it doesn't have to be like this. When you talk about mental health and well-being with young people and with children, they do talk about their own experience. They do talk about concerns over access to support. But what they also say to you is that they want help in staying well. They want to be able to grow up well. They want to be able to have environments where they can feel safe and secure, be with friends, experience different activities with friends, have positive relationships with their peers, but also with adults too. Because, of course, if you don't have all of those places to go to, you don't have the positive adult relationships that you would have had in all of those places if they were there. They want to be able to self-determine their own future. And that's something that I think is very important for us to build on. As part of that, kids do say they want to spend more time with friends and playing. They also say they want to spend time volunteering, having that common experience. But certainly, they want to have places where they can be kids together and play. That community-based support in schools through hubs and through the local environment, and that some local authorities are starting to look at in terms of social prescription. And so looking particularly today, I wanted to look at access to play within the community and the importance of that for children, and the importance of that in terms of being the foundations of the support, of early intervention, of prevention, of being able to offer children that experience in childhood that we would all wish there to be. And the fact of the matter, of course, as you all know, is there have been declining access to places to play over recent decades. And I was doing an interview, there's an excellent article today in The Guardian covering many of these things. And I was doing an interview yesterday evening on LBC about this, which was turning into a phone-in. And the question is, well, how could this be? What happened? Don't we all remember it? Don't we all remember playing out? How isn't that the same anymore? How did this all happen? And of course, the places we remember are often now out of bounds, or built upon, or have very heavy traffic there. The issue of parents, someone said, well, parents have got to stop padlocking their children to them. Well, of course, then the next question is this parents' fault? No, parents are responding to what they experience every day in their area. And what we know is that in the past, parents, families were much less likely to be as mobile as they are now, were much more likely to have someone in the house during the day, were much more likely to know their neighbours. Things have changed, and part of our challenge is now to look at how we create safe communities for children to play and grow up and thrive within the context of the environments that we see today. And that's without even going down the route of screens and the impact of 24/7 communications and the like. So the challenges that children and young people are facing in their lives are coupling with the changes in the environment in a way that makes childhood, I think, almost unrecognisable to how it would have been 40 or 50 years ago. And here, some familiar stats compared to the 70s, 50% less time in unstructured play. And this is the new normal. We don't experience children playing out for hours on end. Let's remember, many, many children won't have access to gardens or safe places at the moment. And there's a figure here, children are playing out for just over 3 hours each day. Most children, I don't believe, will be spending that much time. And where it does happen, often that is in the garden at home. So just as many of those services have declined over the last decade, we've also seen many of the places children will play and thrive and be children in their environment also decline. We know that 800 playgrounds have closed. And I said before, youth centres, school playing fields now are less likely to be in place than they were. And primary and secondary schools, many now have much shorter breaks and many have much more cramped provision. But again, it doesn't have to be like this. It isn't necessarily the way that we need to make choices or have to make choices. And this, I think, is a key moment to fight back and put children centre stage, but also start to show, like some of our European partner countries, quite how that can be done. And when you come to the absolute core of this, you know, this is about children experiencing childhood in the freest way possible. We need to really stress the links between playing and learning and social development. Again, in that interview last night, the person said to me, well, you know, what is this all about? Isn't it just the stuff that happens around the edges? Well, no. This is about children working out their place in the world and also their place in their local community with all of the skills, the self-confidence and sense of self that can bring. And without that, then I think many children will struggle in many different ways. So I wanted to let you know what we, the Centre for Young Lives, were actively engaged in as part of this debate, and really offer an opportunity and ask for you to be engaged in that as well over the next year. We thought this was such an important issue that only last week we set up what we're calling a Raising the Nation Play Commission, an inquiry for the next 12 months. Now, it's been led by someone called, an entrepreneur called Paul Lindley. He is the person who founded the Ella's Kitchen baby foods, you know, the squidgy stuff that you get everywhere. But he's also someone who is hugely committed to children's well-being, children's welfare, and wants to use that entrepreneurial zeal to be able to advocate for a different system and a different scenario for children, especially the most disadvantaged children in this country. We've set up the commission. It's got a group of commissioners on it that will advise and steer us. It'll run throughout the year and take evidence, and we would love to hear from you. There is an open call for evidence at the moment, and we'll take evidence one-on-one with individuals and organisations. What ultimately we want to do is to hear not only why this is important, but see and hear from those who are making positive steps and really showing what works and how this can be done. We want to create a momentum, a wave, if you like, of not only possibility this could happen, but probability too, because we think with the potential for a new government in just 3 weeks or so, there is a desire to see this kind of real change. And this, I think, is something that could really make a difference. These are the areas that we are examining and looking at in detail: learning through play, the right to play, time to play, importantly, digital play, places to play, absolutely core within that, and parents and play. We really want to know what it would take for parents to be able to feel comfortable with enabling and allowing their children to play in their community. And a core part of that, I think, is about parents being at the heart of those conversations and co-designing their local community spaces for children. We're really keen to see what comes through that. And there's some big questions that we're asking throughout, and I think these are questions that will resonate as well as part of many of your discussions to play. The obvious there about, what happens when children play and how does this improve health and well-being. But also important ones in here. How can schools, integrated care boards and councils support children's play with such a paucity of development over the last few years? I think we now need to look and rebuild positively at how we can create new partnerships, how we can create new investments and sustainable funding for this as part and parcel of what we'd expect in an area, and hopefully as part and parcel of what children and their families can expect in their day-to-day lives. What do play-centred towns, neighbourhoods, cities and countries look like? I know these are some of the discussions that you're going to be touching on today. How can we support play and wider children's experiences in the public sphere, in public spaces? And I think it's important to recognise that a lot of parents don't feel that public parks in their area are safe places for children at the moment when they're not supervised. Why is that so, and what can we do about it? We know there are some great initiatives, but how do we get to the point where we notice it when it doesn't happen rather than notice it when we do? And what is the role of government in all of this and other agencies to make it happen? We want a government that can enable this, can back it, can get behind this in terms of their legislation and, yes, some of their funding as well. But we don't want to wait for government to give us permission on this. I want to encourage everyone with their own agency in their own sphere to be able to do as much as they can, which I know you will be doing, to really enable the kind of developments that we're talking about, the kind of experiences that will make all the difference for children, and especially within that, disadvantaged children. So we want something that I think probably is shared by virtually everyone in the room, to make our neighbourhoods the best places we can to grow up in. But there's an awful long way to go in terms of making that reality, especially in some of our most deprived areas. I do think there's a growing consensus about the need for radical change. And I suppose my challenge to everyone here today is let's rise to that challenge. Let's be ambitious about that level of change, and let's be aspirational for those children, but also let's be confident. Let's be confident that we can make the case, not only in terms of the kind of design, the kind of communities that we know children and families want us to develop, but also make the case in terms of benefits for that, not only in terms of the children and families, but also in terms of the public purse. I think we can argue the case that this is not just a cost, it's actually an investment to save, and one which our communities and indeed our country desperately need at the moment. And what I'd hope is with a new government, there will be a new emphasis on the importance of our communities, especially our most disadvantaged communities, and one that I think this group here can really inform by your knowledge and your experience, but also your partnership in making that happen. So I guess, in short, I'm asking everyone here to be a warrior for children, especially those children who haven't had much of a voice in many of these decisions today. I think we can transform children's experience of growing up in our neighbourhoods in this country. And I think there are fantastic examples, both here, but especially looking around the world, of how that can be. We know what's needed. There's increasing evidence and data and increasing evidence on what works. And now I think there's a potential to work together to really bring home that message, to really present that case, and to confidently achieve the change that I know so many children and their families desperately want. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Anne. That's fantastic, and a great way to open this morning. I know you mentioned that we mustn't wait for government. I absolutely agree, but I think they could certainly enable what we're trying to achieve better. One of the challenges is, of course, the different departments with different responsibilities. So how do we secure that joined up cross-departmental working? I'll leave that with you for a second. We'll take a couple more if that's okay.
Just
we'll do them in
small
groups.
one then.
Yeah. Over to you.
The work that Jonathan Haidt's done around anxious generation, and I absolutely agree that we've got to create these places where children can play, where parents feel safe to let them play. I'm old enough to remember coming home when the street lights came on and those kind of things. What role do you think that schools have got in breaking that attraction of the smartphone, that 24-hour connectedness of all singing, all dancing, bells and whistles? Because the two do go hand in hand, don't they? And there's as those play areas have diminished, parents have got more reluctant to let out, and then it's a bit of a perfect storm, I think. Thank you.
Amanda Seames from Bradford Institute for Health Research. So myself and colleagues from University College London submitted evidence to the Levelling Up Housing around children in the built environment. So we were just interested how that aligned with this new call for evidence, because we're quite keen, obviously, to submit evidence for that, but whether we just submit the same or we need to do something else. And how it's factored into the new call for evidence would be interesting to know. Thank you.
We could wait for even the best-willed government for a long time, and, kids only have a certain amount of years growing up. It's a short season. So I do believe that, whilst really pushing for that kind of national framework, this enabling framework, also we've got to get on with it as well along the way. And probably when we, that's what government would say as well. In terms of that joined up child-centred government, I mean, obviously, I would love to see that and, advocate strongly for that. But I do think that we have to, in some ways, join the dots ourselves whilst we're waiting for that to happen. We're yet to see that, potentially if there's a change of government and we have a new Labour government in 3 weeks' time, whether actually there is a reconfigured Department for Education. I would love to see a department that calls itself Children and Families and Schools as well, and for all the responsibilities around children to come back there. At the moment, they're scattered all over the place. I think that gives, much more of a clear direction around children, but also the potential to join things up in a much more both dynamic and useful way. But we aren't there yet, and I can't always have what I want. So I think that in many ways, if that isn't the case, we have to make the case and almost set up our own framework, if you like, within that. So we can look at mechanisms, we can get together, we can bring together policy teams across different departments, we can explain clearly, we can advocate for an interministerial group, all those kind of things. But I would still hold out hope that we do get that joined up infrastructure at some point in the near future. So hopefully shouldn't be as hard as it has been. In terms of social media, I mean, exactly. It's two sides of the same coin, and both kind of, the lack of space leads you to the screen leads you to not having the confidence to be able to be in that environment, and also parents not having that confidence. I do think that we have the conversations that have been going on over the last few weeks and months have started to change things. I think that schools are more robust in their attitudes towards smartphones now, and most will ask children to leave those at the beginning of the day. So there is that period of time. But I also think that, children do want to be with other kids. They want that. And with that experience, I think many would happily leave their smartphones alone, but they don't have that option at the moment. I mean, when I've talked to young people, they've been remarkably insightful. They say, well, I want to be able to be with other kids with an experience. And they describe the sort of things that actually in past years you would expect to be quite normal, having things to do after school, places to go, maybe holiday play schemes and the like. But this was presented as something that actually would be a fantastic thing to have. And also, one particular young guy said to me, and to get me out of myself, otherwise I'm always with myself on my phone and the like. So I think we have to argue robustly about the need for those public spaces and for those public amenities which have slipped away. We know there's not going to be massive amounts of money, so I do think this is about making that argument about investor save, but rebuilding that infrastructure, which is around supporting kids and their families as they grow up in their local area, and the importance of place, which is now, much more popular and of the moment than it was even 5 years ago. And there was a period where I was told at one point when I first became Children's Commissioner, no, don't even bother talking about place because people don't want to hear it, and they'll probably just turn off their ears, when you hear it. So it's not the case now. People know that this is important. So good time to strike, I would say. And then in terms of the inquiry and our commission, well, I mean, essentially, I think it's up to you. Feel free. I don't want to give people extra work. Send along what you've already done. I'm not going to get, start rejecting things because it went somewhere else. But if there are additional things you just want to add on, then that's fine as well. But please send us what you've got, whether it's just that or whether there's additional stuff as well. And we're very much in touch with the inquiry and those that were writing the report, and we'll be drawing all of that as part of our own inquiry as well.
Thanks,
Hi.
lovely to hear from all of this. I'm just going to carry on with that point about the inquiry.
Yeah.
There wasn't any mention of housing, and considering how high up the agenda it is politically, and that the current housing minister said that his priority was speeding up the planning system, and I'm hearing the same from the potential Labour government, how will this inquiry address the importance, how will this project address the importance of bringing housing into the debate and not falling back on the same kind of rhetoric that is essentially saying it's more important that we build lots of homes, which, if you look at them, are not meeting children's needs at all in terms of doorstep play. Is that going to be an important part of your project?
Well, certainly housing absolutely is. And, my first starter on this was talking about housing where people live. So it absolutely is. What I will do is I'll look at the detail of what we have planned and ensure it's got enough prominence. It wouldn't have not been there because we would have ensured it was, if you like, but I'll make sure it's as prominent as it needs to be. And what we might do, and this is a bit of an open offer, what we're doing with some issues, if they're not one of those 6 but still really deserve additional scrutiny, we're partnering up with a more specialist organisation to potentially do a particular piece of work with we might have a small specialist report with that. So if that's of interest to anyone around housing, then we would love to have a conversation with you.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much. Please will everybody join me in thanking Anne just one more time.